Welcome to the Ag Inspo podcast, where we delve into the dynamic world of agriculture, uncovering the stories that inspire, empower, and drive change. Join hosts Rena and Ron Rabo as they explore the journeys of farmers, entrepreneurs, and leaders who are making a difference as they navigate the critical work of transitioning their operation to the next generation. From navigating family dynamics to developing the next generation of ag leaders, we'll bring you the insights and inspiration you need to thrive in today's ever-evolving agricultural landscape. So whether you're a seasoned industry veteran or just starting out, get ready to be inspired, informed, and empowered as we learn from best practices and a few colossal failures on the Ag Inspo podcast.
All right, well, welcome to the Ag Inspo podcast today. And I am extremely excited about our guest that we have with us today. I have a massive amount of respect for Mr. Jim Mathis, who is with us today. He's over in Laramie, Wyoming. And Jim, I love that you call yourself not the president, not the owner of WyoTech, which is an educational institution that I'll let you expand on, but you call yourself a catalyst. And I love that word. And I would like to just tell our audience group today that you're really in for a treat, because what Jim has gone through in his life, where he came from, and his perspective on making sure that he is being a catalyst and a major player in helping to develop a skill set that is massively important in virtually every walk of life today is really quite remarkable. And so, Jim, welcome to the program, and we're delighted to have you. And I guess I would ask if you could just kick off a little bit, about what your background is, who you are, what you're involved in, and then we'll kind of get into some basic things in regard to what direction you've gone and how you've gotten to where you're at today.
Awesome. Thank you, Ron. It's a pleasure to be doing this today. And like Ron mentioned, I've got a kind of a crazy journey of my life. And it's through the valleys of my life and mistakes I've made that have made me what I am today. And I'm still learning and still making mistakes, but it hasn't slowed me down much. But my dad, to start off with, my dad was a preacher. He moved the family to LaGrange, Wyoming, which is only about 21 miles away from where Ron lived. And I knew of them growing up a little bit, but I was 12 years old when I moved to Wyoming. I was young, rambunctious, wanted to be a cowboy. And I own 2 ranches, and I still want to be a cowboy to this day, but and I'm gaining. But anyway, my parents, because I was a go-getter at a young age, my parents allowed me to move out of the house when I was 14 to move on a farm and ranch. And so that got me into agriculture. We had some cattle. He raised registered quarter horses, and he also had some dryland wheat and some alfalfa. And so at 14 years old, I moved in with Gene and Dot Smith from Hawk Springs, Wyoming. And it turned my life around as far as giving me the work ethic, the long days, the persistence to work through issues and figure things out, because a lot of times you're out by yourself and you got to figure things out by yourself. So that made it a huge impact on me growing up. And I fell in love with the agricultural industry as well as equipment. And at 17, I decided to join the custom combine crew and head to Texas. And so I quit living with Gene and Dot Smith and went on the custom combine crew. And that led me as a 17-year-old to that winter, I drove semis. The guy I worked for, his dad had a fleet of semis. And so during the winter, when we weren't combining or hauling silage or whatever, we started driving semi. So I started driving semi when I was 17. Didn't think anything was any better than driving a semi at 17 years old. We hauled grain and cattle. And that led me into wanting to own my own fleet of semis. And so I decided to go to diesel mechanic school in Laramie at 18 and went to school. And halfway through school, I had amazing teachers, and it just changed my life around about education and training. And I hated high school because it always interrupted my work and my paycheck. And yet, when I went to WyoTech thinking I was going to own a fleet of semis, good training, good teachers, and I'm passionate about agriculture and equipment. It truly changed my life. And so instead of I graduated. It's a 6-month program. Anyway, instead of wanting to go buy a fleet of semis or start buying semis, I decided I want to come back and teach. So I literally begged my way into teaching 5 months after I graduated as a 19-year-old, which is a crazy story in itself. But so that's a start. So I can keep going, or you can ask me more questions. So
Well, so just so everyone has a little bit of perspective, I don't think Rena knows this either. So I was asked to be a keynote speaker at an event in Davenport, Iowa, a few weeks ago, and I brought my Wyoming jokes and everything with me. And there's this guy in the back of the room that keeps raising his hand like he knows my Wyoming jokes. And I thought, no one in the Midwest understands or knows about my Wyoming jokes.
yeah.
But this guy in the back did. Well, it turns out that when I got done speaking, the next speaker was Jim.
Yeah.
And how crazy is it that I'm from a small town? Jim is originally from a small town, and those small towns, incidentally, like he said, are 21 miles apart. And who would have ever thought that we were actually going to meet for the very first time in Davenport, Iowa, right at this conference? And when I heard your story, Jim, I was just really taken back by the fact that at 14 years old, now my dad, I think I told you, was a friend of Gene Smith's.
Yes.
And you moved in with at age 14. And I hadn't heard that word since for probably 30 or 35 years. And so I hadn't heard his name, and to be able to hear that and have that connection, I just felt like there was a little bit of a connection there. But to think at the age of 14, you decided to go out because you were so interested in becoming a cowboy, and you were so interested in becoming involved in agriculture. And then when you shared the next part of your story, like you just did in regard to a semi truck and how school was getting in your way, I thought, I think I have a son exactly like that. And my son has always talked about being interested. It's my middle son. He's always talked about being interested in attending WyoTech. And so, Jim, I think it would actually be important that you became an instructor at WyoTech. So first of all, can you explain to our listeners, what is WyoTech? What was WyoTech when you joined it as an instructor? And could you just go through your story there about how you became an instructor only after 6 months of training and only at the age of 19, and how that whole thing went down? It's a great story.
Yeah, it's absolutely crazy. I don't claim to be very, very smart, but I've always been persistent. So, and I can wear people down to where they hire me because I'm so persistent. But so I graduated from WyoTech as a 19-year-old and just turned 19, but with a new passion. Instead of owning semis, I wanted to come back and teach at WyoTech. So I went right back to the custom combine crew. So as soon as I graduated in June, I hit the road and went to Texas and joined the combine crew and headed north. And that fall, I actually had my own combine leased. I was combining corn in Broken Bow, Nebraska. But I had a new passion. I wanted to come back and teach at WyoTech. So that's what I continually thought about. And why, I don't know. It's just something God put in my head or something. I don't know why. But partly because I think I had in my opinion, terrible instructors or teachers in high school. I had great teachers at WyoTech. And again, I'm sure part of it was attitude and everything else. But I just loved how I was taught at WyoTech. It's a hands-on theory and hands-on, theory and hands-on. And it made sense to me so much more so than just sitting in a classroom being demanded to learn something that X's and O's and Y's and everything else that made no sense. But once I applied it to electrical or hydraulic systems, it made all the sense in the world at WyoTech. So anyway, again, I had this passion now to teach at WyoTech. So in October of 1976, I was combining corn in Broken Bow, Nebraska, and my best friend, Danny, wanted to enroll at WyoTech. And so the recruiter came down and talked to Danny. And during that process, I told Pete Schutte, the recruiter, I said, I want to go back and teach someday at WyoTech. And he said, oh, teacher got fired yesterday from diesel program. And I said, well, that's what I want to teach. I want to teach you diesel. And so on Monday, I was combining corn, an old Gleaner G, and 6-row corn head. And again, if you've been in agriculture, you go up 6 rows back in the day, 6 rows up, quarter mile, 6 rows back, a quarter mile. And if you don't break down, you have a lot of time to think. So by noon on Monday, I thought, I'm going to go to Broken Bow, find a payphone, and call Dave Hill, the boss at WyoTech. And so I called Dave Hill, found a payphone in Broken Bow, called Dave Hill, and I said, Dave, I understand there's an opening for a teacher. I'd like to come up and interview you. And I told him my name and so on and so forth. And he kept saying, Jim Mathis. He said, Jim Mathis. He said, that's name's familiar. Finally, he says, did you graduate from WyoTech? I said, yes, sir. He said, when did you graduate? I said, 4 months ago. And he says, well, how old are you? I said, I'm 19. And he just literally broke out laughing. He said, there's no way I'm hiring a 19-year-old to teach 19-year-olds and olders. He said, there's no way you have that much experience. I said, Dave, I left home when I was 14. I've been working on this stuff and driving it and, equipment and on and on and on. I said, I've got a lot of experience for a 19-year-old kid. Now, trust me, 19-year-olds know everything. And I thought I knew a lot more than I did. But I still had more experience than most 19-year-olds. But anyways, there's no way he said, there's no way I'm hiring a 19-year-old kid. So again, right back to the combine. And by Wednesday, all I could do is think about, I want to teach, And so I called him back again, went to I'm going to payphone again, and called him back, and the conversation got shorter. Friday, I called him back again, and he heard my voice. He hung up on me. And so then it's decision time. What do you do? Do you just give up and say, well, that wasn't my career path, or do you keep going? And so Sunday, by the time Sunday rolled around, I thought, he's going to talk to me. So I parked the combine and I drive to Laramie, Wyoming, which with my old pickup was like an 8-hour drive, spent the night in a cheap hotel, and walked into his office unannounced Monday morning. I was the shyest kid you've ever seen in your life, but I was always determined and persistent. If I wanted something, to keep pushing it, I would say be persistent, but also be professional. And so I walked into his office. He had no idea who I was. He was sitting down and he was smoking a cigar. And so I just walked up to his desk, shaking like a leaf. And he stands up, takes a big puff on his cigar. And I stuck my hand out over his desk and shook his hand. I says, Dave, I'm Jim Mathis, and I want to teach for you. And he said, you're the most determined SOB I've ever met in my life. He said, you're hired. He said, I can't get rid of you. So he says, when can you show up? I said, well, I got to finish my combine and jobs. And I said, I can be here in 3 or 4 weeks. And so 3 weeks later, I turned my combine in and I started teaching as a 19-year-old kid. And that started a crazy 26-year career the first go around. Yeah.
So, and what for those people who've never heard of WyoTech, kind of expand on what WyoTech does and kind of their educational model.
Sure. So WyoTech is known all through the United States. So we're what we call a destination school, trade school in Laramie, Wyoming. And our students come from all 50 states. Only 4% of our student body comes from Wyoming. So 96% come from out of state. But we're a highly sought after, intensive diesel, automotive, collision refinishing, and welding and fabrication program school. So we focus kind of on the trades in transportation as well as welding and fabrication. And then we have specialty programs that teach chassis fabrication. We have a street rod building program. We have a high performance engine. So you have to have a chassis for your street rod. You have to have a street rod for your chassis. You have to have a high performance engine to put in your street rod. You have to have beautiful upholstery. So we have an upholstery program to put in your street rod. And again, not everything goes in a street rod, but we teach all those facets. We also have business management. So if you you can learn business, so you can own your own business or get into management. We also have an advanced diesel program where you actually rebuild semis. After you're competent in your core diesel program, you can take advanced diesel and rebuild semis for your Penske's and Halliburton and so on and so forth. But WyoTech is known for its high quality, intensity, as well as our professionalism code. So we're, I think, the only school that has a very strict attendance policy. So if you miss 3 days, as an example, in a 6-week period, you're suspended. So we take their training, our students' training, very, very serious. And so we take roll call 8 times a day, because our students go to school 8 hours and 20 minutes a day. So we're very highly intense. Our students have to be clean shaven. They have to wear a uniform shirt. We give them perfect attendance pins when they do achieve perfect attendance in a 6-week module. And so we're very pro-student, but we're also very disciplined and structured. And so it's not for everybody, but by the same token, because we're the way we are, we have employers literally fly in their private jets and fly in commercially and everything else, drive in to recruit our students, because they're used to working 8 hours a day, over 8 hours a day. They're used to uniforms, they're used to structure, they're used to attendance policy, professionalism code. So our employer group that recruits our students are some of the biggest companies out there. Your Caterpillars, your Cummins, your Detroit, all your car manufacturers, as well as independent shops, because they know what they're getting as far as that structure and work ethic. So that's
awesome.
That's it in a nutshell, Ron. Yep.
Well, so yeah, so when you started teaching at the age of 19 at WyoTech, give us a little bit of a better understanding about, was WyoTech privately owned at that point, and then walk us through kind of the different transitions in ownership and what transpired over that 26-year period of time when you were instructing there.
Yeah, so I only taught for about 2 years, but I started in November of 1976, and I was all about the gears. I love transmissions, differentials, and everything under the truck. I just fell in love with gears. I can't stand them now, but anyway, that time changes things. But so I taught what we call powertrains. It's your 13 speeds and 18 speeds and 15 speeds and so on and so forth. And your 2-speed differentials and your lockers and so on and so forth. And so we were owned, it's a private company. WyoTech is a private company. It was owned by 3 gentlemen, Mike Schutte, Mac Trone, and I'll think of the other guy's name. And long story short, Mike Schutte, over the next 2 years, my first 2 years of employment, he was able to buy out the other 2 owners. And so then it became Mike Schutte owned, and that was a positive thing because you could just tell he was much more of a leader, invested back into WyoTech. But then in 1985 timeframe, he sold to Macmillan Publishing Company. And so that's a big, huge book publishing company out in New York City. Well, they're England based, but they had a huge office in New York City. And so that changed management. I only taught for 2 years, 2.5 years, and then I became assistant training director. Then the guy that hired me, this Dave Hill, he resigned. Dave Cermak took his position. Once Dave left, I took his position as training director. And so I was training director for diesel in my mid-20s. And so I was over all of our diesel program, changing the curriculum, making sure our classes and shops were clean and students were in compliance and so on and so forth. And so life was good. And then Macmillan Publishing Company sells to Phillips colleges in 1989. And with that change, the vice president left that I reported to, and they interviewed 2 people, myself and another gentleman. And the other gentleman had his bachelor's degree. And so they hired him as the vice president, which no problem at all. Well, my first one-on-one with my new boss, he told me his first exact words were, "You'll never be successful." And I was shocked. "Without your bachelor's degree, you'll never be successful without your bachelor's degree." And I'm thinking, I'm a high school dropout. I've made it all the way to be a training director. I've got a house, a new mortgage, and 3 kids, and making pretty decent money. And I'm thinking, whoa. I don't know what you call success, but for a kid coming out of LaGrange, Wyoming, with my background, I don't think I've done too bad. So I argued with him. I pushed his button. I said, well, I think I've done quite well so far. And he says, you'll never go beyond where you're at without your bachelor's degree. I suggest you quit, go get your degree at University of Wyoming, and then come back in 4 years. Well, he wanted me to quit. I mean, that's, so for a year, he put a lot of pressure on me to quit and get my bachelor's degree so I'd be successful. And again, this is a two-way street. I was not the most polite, and still not all the time. So I pushed, every time he pushed, I pushed back and made fun of him. Long story short, in the meantime, I became a board director, member of the board for the Wyoming Credit Union. I was the first person outside the University of Wyoming system that became a board member on Wyoming, the credit union. And I'm in a board meeting on August 20th, 1990 at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And I get called out of that board meeting to go back to work to get fired. And so I walk into my boss's office, and he told me he had good news and bad news. I said, what's the bad news? He said, you're fired. I said, what's the good news? Well, he says, Phillips colleges that own us, they have a school down in Rutledge, Louisiana or something. And he said, I think we might be able to get you a job down there. And I said, oh, Alan, I said, I think you got this backwards. I said, I think the good news is I'm fired. I said, I think the bad news is I have this opportunity in some podunk town or big town in Louisiana or something. I said, there's no way this cowboy's going to Louisiana, to a big city. And he said, really? I said, yeah. And then he says, well, do you have any questions? I said, yeah, where's my check? He said, well, you'll have to come back tomorrow and get it. So the next day I went to get my check, and I'm not money driven or anything, but the new president had authorized the vice president to fire me. But the new president had promised me a bonus for putting on the entire diesel program at the Wyoming State Penitentiary to reduce recidivism. And it worked for 2 or 3 years before he even got there. And so he was, as a new president, he said, did you get any money out of this deal? And I said, no. And he said, well, that project made WyoTech a lot of money. He said, I'll give you a bonus for it. And I said, great. Well, anyway, the next day when I get my final check, I'm not money driven, but I've got a new mortgage. I don't know what I want to do, be when I grow up. And I know I'm not going to go to college, but, and so I didn't know if I was going to start my trucking company. I wasn't sure what. So I opened my check. I normally never open. I just leave and deposit it, but I opened my check. There's no bonus money. And I thought, I'm unemployed now. I got a mortgage. I got 3 kids below the age of 5. I better ask the president about this money. So anyway, I went and talked to the president. And he's a little short guy, and he didn't want to talk to me. And he looked at me right in the center of the chest, and he wouldn't look up at me. So I just grabbed his hand and shook it. And I said, Terry, I suppose me getting fired means I'm not going to become your next vice president. That's the first thing that popped into my head. And he looks up, and I'm laughing, and he laughs, and he said, yeah. He said, I suppose that's what that means, but have a chair. So we talked for 2 hours. He promised me he'd give me my bonus money, so on and so forth. And never thought anything of it. So the next morning, I'm literally laying on the couch at 7 o'clock in the morning, wondering what I want to be when I grow up. And the phone rang, and my wife answers it. And of course, this is before cell phones. And she brings me the long cord across the living room, and she says, I think it's the president of WyoTech. And I said, well, give me the phone. So anyway, I laid there and I grabbed the phone. I said, this is Jim. And he says, what are you doing? And I said, well, I'm laying here wondering what I want to be when I grow up. And he laughed again. He said, well, I know what you want to be. You want to become one of my vice presidents. I said, yes, sir. He says, I need to hire someone with your attitude. And he says, we need you back. I said, I've never seen anything like that before, yesterday. So he says, I want you to come back. I said, well, when did you want me to show up? He said, Friday. So I was fired for 3 days, and I came back with a promotion. Well, the guy that fired me again for a year, he's been telling me that I'd never go beyond, I'd never be successful in the school business. I'd never go beyond where I'm at, blah, 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 blah. So I tell this story not to brag or whatever, but we all make mistakes. And trust me, I've made plenty of them, hiring, firing, and everything else. But my boss, my former boss, had a choice. He could have said, boy, I didn't see that coming, Jim. Welcome back. Let's try to figure this thing out and work together. And he was 20 years older than me. Maturity-wise, he probably should have done that. I was maybe 30, 28, 29, 30 time in that age. And I didn't know any better, definitely at the time. But instead, he said, he told the president, if you bring Mathis back, I quit. And so he quit, and I moved into his office as the vice president, only vice president. So I did that for 4 years. That company changes ownership again. New president comes in. He didn't think after 8 months, he didn't think I knew enough, I guess. And so he was the interrogator, intimidator, you name it, yeller, screamer, slap the desk, the whole bit. And after 8 months, he pulled me in his office on a Monday afternoon. And he said, Jim, he says, you're no longer my vice president. I was the only vice president that had over half the company underneath my umbrella. And he said, you're no longer my president, you're no longer my vice president. He said, your replacement's coming tomorrow morning. You need to be out of your office tonight. And I said, okay. And he says, take all your personal stuff home. So I kind of frowned and looked at him. I said, well, why? He says, I says, what office? Can I just move it to my new office? He says, for what you're going to be doing, you don't need an office. I said, oh, I said, what am I going to be doing? He says, managing the janitors. So, and maintenance guys. So I went from vice president to basically a head janitor. I didn't have to clean toilets. I just had to make sure they got done, and maintenance. And so that was a humbling experience. Best thing ever happened to me, but it was a humbling experience at the time. And it's just like after 2 weeks, I tell people, and this is 100% honest, I literally walked on my bottom lip for the first 2 weeks. I was so hurt and humiliated. Of course, everybody's talking behind your back and asking us what the heck happened. And I didn't know what happened. All I know is I went from hero down to zero pretty doggone quick. And I was too stubborn and stupid to quit. And if he would have fired me, I would have left with a smile on my face. But I was not going to quit. He was not going to get my resignation. And so, long story short, after about another 8 months, and by the way, after about 2 months, I found a janitor's closet, made my office. So I finally had an office and a desk at my janitor's closet. And then after about a total of 8 months of me not doing a whole lot of anything, we were owned by Bankers Trust out of New York City, which at the time was the fourth largest bank in the United States. And a sidebar, they're right across from the World Trade Center towers. And when I became president, I used to go back and give presentations, stay in the Marriott in the World Trade Center towers, walk or the elevator down, cross the street up to Bankers Trust, and look out in the conference room, look out over the bay and see the Statue of Liberty. And I'm thinking, for a kid from LaGrange, Wyoming, with a high school, with a GED and a high school dropout, to being given presentations to the owners of Bankers Trust or the executives of Bankers Trust, that just doesn't happen very often. But anyway, going back to my story, when Bankers Trust owned us, the company started failing. And so they flew out after me not doing a whole lot for about 8-9 months. And they forced that president to get me involved with personnel and sales and marketing. And something I thought I didn't mind the personnel, but I thought salesmen were all liars. And but I had to get involved with salespeople, and found out within 2 or 3 months I fell in love with the processes and the psychology and the data, and projecting. And I'm a teacher, and found out that these salespeople had not been trained on the product. How to, what were the buzzwords? What made a diesel student or a diesel student interested in this stuff? They were never been trained on that stuff. So I was able to put some training programs together and learn from this new president that originally, for the first 18 months, he tried to run me off. The next 18 months, he poured his heart and soul into me. Literally, we'd go to lunch 2 or 3 times a week. Best education and I learned more from that guy than anybody I've ever worked for in my life. But he taught me balance sheets, P&L statements, projections, square foot of need for square foot, triple net leases. I never heard of a triple net lease before in my life, and learned all that type of stuff, negotiations, and settled some lawsuits that we were in, and amazing experience. And again, looking back, you think, why did he demote me? Well, he had a reason. He was frustrated because he was so intelligent. And I knew what I knew. You don't know what you don't know. And so anyway, he left after 3 years of being president. But I learned so much from that guy. And then I became president. We changed the whole culture of the company, and away we went in a growth mode. So
yeah. Before you go into that phase of the college, can I go back and just just ask you a couple questions about the psychology of being fired from something.
Yes.
Because I think that that is one thing that, in the development of young people, sometimes there is a fear that I need to follow these rules or I need to be in this parameter so tight that I'm not even able to really express my own unique gifts. I don't know how to navigate or advocate for myself because I'm afraid of losing something that I might not even really want to begin with. It's just that I don't want to lose it. So, you're obviously a person that is very tenacious by personality. I would say in just the little bit of story that we had, you're also a person that stands up for what they believe in and is probably not pushed around very easily. So, what give your perspective on how young people should be in the workforce today, given that it may not always have a true values alignment with where they are and the companies that they're working with. Just give some perspective and advice on that.
Sure. And again, you don't know what you don't know as a young person or an old person. And um, so fortunately, my parents were awesome parents, and they built, at least in me, a confidence that, you know, you're going to make mistakes. I didn't have any idea I'd ever get fired because, we were so proud. I was always a proud person as far as I'm going to outwork anybody around me. That was my thing. May not be the smartest, but I can show up on time. I can put in as many hours as my boss. And so I was bound and determined that I may not know everything, but you are not going to outwork me, whether it's agriculture, lifting bales or whatever, or, driving tractor, I'll put in more hours or as many hours as anybody else. And so I had that confidence that, and again, I've learned from my mistakes. I didn't get to where I'm at by my successes. I got here by my failures. But for young people, bosses are still bosses, and sometimes they will bark at you. I just barked at one of my vice presidents 30 minutes ago. And so again, it's not personal. It's, you've got to add value to whatever thing you're doing. You have to be persistent. You have to understand that it's just not a paycheck. If you're in it just for a paycheck, life is too long and too short just for a paycheck. See what the company's doing or your operation is doing to add value. Think ahead. Growing up on the ranch when I left home, it didn't take me very long when Gene Smith was driving and a gate needed to be open. I had the door open before he stopped, jumping out of that pickup, and time is of the essence, and so there's got to be a sense of urgency too at the time at certain times. Other times there has to be a sense of we got to pause here because we don't know everything, or we got to let the wheat ripen a little bit more, the hay dry a little bit more, but when it's ready to go, and you have to, as a young person, you have to learn, when do I push? When do I speed up? When do I have to say, okay, I'm ready to go do something, but the wheat's not ready. The hay's not dry enough. I got to just wait. I got to go find another project to do, because so it's learning what your organization is doing as well as what your bosses want. And so young people, we took in a 16-year-old great niece that came from a terrible background, and she's working for us here at WyoTech. She started yesterday, and it's all about the paycheck right now. She said, I've never made money like this. Well, again, so on the way over, I'm coaching her. I said, well, yes, it's great about the paycheck, but you've got to add value. So you have to learn to add value, and she will. She's an awesome, smart young gal. But it's just not about a paycheck. It's adding value so they can pay you, and so they can promote you and, give you more responsibility and everything else. So I don't know if that's quite answered your question, but, but yeah, you're going to get barked at. If an organization is blowing and going, trust me, not all bosses are always nice. I'm pretty easy to get along with most of the time. But boy, when I'm ready to go, let's get going here. And if I see something that I don't like, I'll speak up and say, I don't like that. So again,
are you ranching right along all of this? Have you
yes, somewhat. We sold most of our cows 4 years ago when WyoTech started taking off. WyoTech has a chance of making money, and the ranch was just growing dead over from one year to the next. Had I kept my cows, of course, the cow price has doubled since I sold my cows. But we still have both ranches. One is actually under contract to sell, but we lease them out, but we still put up our own hay, and I have a few cows. My hired hand and son runs some cows on our place. So, yeah. So
That's
last night
awesome.
I was out till dark 30 loading a semi-load of small square bales. So,
Well, and when to kind of piggyback Rena's question a little bit, that I do think I agree. I think that there are a lot of youth in today's world that are just afraid to make a mistake
yeah.
because they don't want to get fired or they don't want to make a misstep. Because I think that we have, as society as a whole, we have set kids up to think that they're always going to be liked and that they're always going to be successful and that they're always going to fit in. But the reality is, in the real world, that is the furthest thing from the truth. You're going to be disliked. You're going to fail. You're going to lose a position. You're going to get fired. You're going to get demoted, what have you. And so looking out into the kids that you work with every day that are in the program and the kids that you worked with over the years, what piece of advice do you give to them about the fact that maybe sometimes the best thing that could have ever happened to you is that you did get fired or that you did get demoted? That is something that is really imperative to a lot of people's stories to get them to where you're, to where they want to be, and certainly has been part of what's gotten you to where you have gotten.
Yes, absolutely. And again, I love telling my story to students because it gives them hope. Because again, I was shy. Didn't know as much as I thought I did. And so you just have to work through that. And again, if you get demoted, if you get barked at, if you get fired or whatever, it's not the end of the world. Have some skills and some confidence and say, I don't know what tomorrow holds, but none of us do. But I'm going to be fine and I'll go get another job. And I hope that people have enough skills behind them that they have that attitude. Because I think some college programs, you really leave with no skills and you're still wondering what you want to be when you grow up after 4, 6, 8 years of school or whatever. And again, that's why I love the trades and agriculture, because you can run tractors, you can do about anything come from an agriculture background. And I tell everybody, everything I learned about leading people, I learned from trailing cows. And my thing with leadership, and I love leadership. I've read all kinds of books and analyzed myself. And again, I'm not claiming to be a best leader by any means, but it's like, when we would trail our cows home, we'd trail 500 or 600 cows from our kite ranch to our home place. And it was a 3-day cattle drive. And we'd spend the night out, so on and so forth. But I hated being the tail, eating dust all day long. I hated being the front because my horse would outwalk the cattle. So I found myself, I wanted to be on the side, looking up on a hill, because our cows they'd be spread out in a line for 2 miles, a good 2 miles. And I wanted to be on the side. And I thought, that's how I want to lead my company. We know our vision of where we want to go. I want to be able to see both ends very clearly so I can step in at the back if I need to push my janitors a little bit and clean bathrooms better, or my leaders are not following the path of where I want to go. I want to be on the side. So I always tell people, I lead from the side. We as a company know where we want to go. We made that very, very clear. Our vision is very, very clear. So now, am I always out there in front, looking behind me, making sure everybody's there? Absolutely not. I'm on the side, making sure the leaders, my 4, 5, 6 vice presidents, are carrying out the mission of leading, managing everything. But I also want to be able to see the tail end. And so I tell people I'm retired. I don't do anything, but that's kind of the story of my life once I got into leadership. Now, again, my mind never stops. I never quit hiring and firing and everything else, and I creating visions and everything else, but I'm not necessarily, once the vision is set, I'm kind of on the side, making sure, looking for opportunities. I've got time to do podcasts. I've got time to go look for new opportunities because I've got a team that covers for me and their skills are doing what they're doing. My skill is looking for opportunity, setting the pace, setting the standards, making sure our toilets are clean all the way up to our P&L statements are being produced and we're profitable, because I want time to be able to think. I don't want to get so busy that, so, and my skill level as technologies come out and, my skill level isn't nearly as good. I can't run most of these departments anymore. But I can set the pace, I can set the vision, I can make sure our standards are set and look for opportunities. So that's what I spend most of my time doing.
One of the things you mentioned just a few minutes ago, Jim, is the expectations that you have of students, holding them accountable to standards of, dress code, attendance, and I'm sure there's probably some others. One of the things that I get the privilege of working with, Ron does too, is working with farm families in their succession planning, right? So bringing next generation farmers home and then figuring out transition plans. And one of the things that I see them oftentimes neglect to do because they're just excited, right? We've got kids coming home and it's exciting, is they fail to figure out both the vision.
Yep.
They fail to set expectations. And because there's no expectations, there's absolutely no accountability. And we have a, kind of sometimes a little bit of a chaotic situation. So would you mind sharing a little bit about your philosophy of expectations and how you have managed to build that into culture? Because I'm sure there's a lot of people that go, I can't have a beard. I have to wear that shirt. I'm sure there's a little bit of a shock factor almost for people entering into your program that all of a sudden they're going to have expectations and accountability. So would
Yes.
you talk about how you build that into your culture?
Yeah, so we have around 33 admissions reps. So when we hire them, that's our standard. I mean, it's and so that's from an employee standpoint, you follow, especially if you're a teacher or whatever, this is our rules, regulations. If we set that right up front. And we do with our students too. But so we have 33, I believe, admissions recruiters that live across the United States. So we have like 3 or 4 in California as an example, 4 in Texas, so on and so forth. And so we train them very, very well that we are not for everybody. And that's the thing. We don't want to be all things to all people. And I think so many organizations try to be all things to all people. So they're always making these exceptions and this and that and changing to adhere to their standards instead of the people adhere to our standards. So first of all, we don't care what your standards are. You're going to follow our standards. And again, that's might be prideful, but that's who we are. And so when we go to high schools and present to high school students, we'll flat out say we are not for everybody because, we have great programs, but it's intense. And we have all these rules and regulations you have to follow. And you have to sign off on these before you ever want to come to WyoTech. Not only do you have to agree to them, your parents have to agree to them. And so our process is we generate interest in high schools. They're either interested in us or not. If they are, and we got some pretty cool programs, so we get a lot of interest in our programs. Rebuilding race engines and welding and fabrication and street rod building, so on and so forth. So we have a lot of interest, diesel, so on and so forth. And so then once a student is interested, we explain this in the high school that this is our process. You're interested, that's great. Now you've got to go tell mom and dad, mom and dad, that we have to meet with them too and explain all our rules and regulations, our costs. We don't like surprises. And so we want everybody to know exactly what they're getting into before they ever think about coming to Laramie, Wyoming. Because the typical student has traveled 1,000 miles to come to WyoTech. And they're 18, 19-year-old. And so then we sit down with mom and dad, we go through all our rules, regulations, we cover the cost and say, mom and dad, Johnny, your son or daughter, they cannot afford, in most cases, unless they're 4-H students and with a bunch of money in the bank, but as a whole, they probably can't afford to attend WyoTech on their own. So are you willing to either borrow money or put some cash in to this thing to allow your son or daughter to attend WyoTech? Yes or no? If they say absolutely not, he's on their own, okay, then Johnny, you got to go look for external scholarships because we don't have any scholarships. You know, scholarships, internal scholarships is just a way to discount tuition, and my employees want paid. And so we don't have any internal scholarship. We don't discount tuition and call it a scholarship. That's why the two previous companies failed and went bankrupt. One went bankrupt, the other one just closed all their campuses down. They gave their profits away. I refused to do it when I was here before in the late 90s, early 2000s, and I refused to do it again. And we're profitable and we're blowing and going. So, but we set the standards high. And everybody has to agree. They have to sign off on all rules, regulations on the financial package that they're going to apply for, so on and so forth. So we know, they know exactly what they're getting into. So as an example, Friday, we will register right at 550 new students coming in from all over the United States. It will be a zoo of a day. But we'll have probably 2,000 people with their parents and siblings and so on and so forth here running through and listening to our orientations and everything else. So, yeah.
That's awesome. There's so many things that I'm taking out of this in terms of, you know, the way that you approach a student is the same way that a family that's excited about having next generation come home could be doing, right? Setting down with clear expectations, making sure that there's buy-in for that, making sure like if it's if there's other parents that are not involved in that family farm to make sure they're buying off on those rules and regulations. I can see so many similarities in what you're saying about just setting the expectations correctly before the first day of class or before the first day of school or before they move back home. I think that's brilliant.
Yes.
Over what period of time was that sort of sales process developed? Is that something that came pretty quickly for WyoTech, or is that something that you just sort of have seen students stumble and fall and not be successful because the expectations weren't clear up front?
Yes, for years, they were not clear up front. Salespeople, I call them salespeople, but our admissions team would soften the touch. Oh, you've got a nose ring. I'm sure they'll overlook that. Or you got hair, over your collar. I'm sure they'll overlook that. And then it made management and instructors the bad people. That's why when I was vice president of training and everything else, I hated salespeople because they were not bold. They didn't use that as a benefit to sell, and it's actually a benefit to sell, but they thought it was a negative because Johnny had long hair or whatever, or the female student said, I'm not going to put my hair up in a bun. To meet, females can put their hair up in a bun and keep it off their collar of their shirt. And so, but parents, they don't mind that. Most parents say, yeah, Johnny, I've been telling you to get a haircut anyway. So now it's a good excuse. So they didn't use it as a positive. And that's why I say I hated salespeople. I didn't hate them. I just hated that they weren't doing their job, in my opinion. And I was always dealing with mad moms and mad students so when I became president, when I started getting into admissions, when I got demoted and come back, that was one of my teaching. I said, no, we're gonna lay the law down. You're gonna lay the law down. They're gonna sign off on all this stuff. And so if a student comes in with long hair and says, my rep told me, I'm going to show them that where they signed off. No, you signed this contract. I don't care what the rep said. You signed this, so it's decision time. Either cut your hair or head back home. And so we got that bold and kicked a few students out immediately. And we still do this day. We had one about 3 years ago from Louisiana. He had dreadlocks, and my team was wishy-washy, and it lasted a week, and I kept hearing this buzz about this one student, and I said, well, it can't be that hard a decision. I said, bring him in here. And his mom and attorney were on the speakerphone, and they're literally yelling and screaming. I said, get the student in here. And I said, it cannot be this hard of a decision. I will make the decision. The student comes in the conference room. I looked up, I said, you need your haircut. I said, have a chair. And again, I'm bold, but again, he signed the contract, not me. And so I said, what's it going to be? And his mom and attorney started yelling, screaming. I just reached over and hung up on him. I said, you're 19 years old. I said, you're a man now. Make a decision. Are you going to allow your hair to screw up an awesome opportunity, or are you going to go back home? I said, your decision. And so him haws around. He finally says, I'm going to go back home. I said, absolutely no problem. I said, we'll buy you a bus ticket. We'll ship all your stuff home. Wasn't meant to be right now. I said, you're always welcome back under our standards. And in the meantime, his mom and attorney are calling, and I said, your son's got on the way back. We're going to sue you. I said, get in line. Get in line. He's the one that signed. He and you signed the contract, not me. See you in court. And they never did. And that's the other thing for leadership. You get threatened with lawsuits. Not that we get threatened every day or anything like that, because we're very upfront and everything else. But those don't concern me. If you're doing the right thing, yell and scream, threaten me, I don't care. Right is right, wrong is wrong. And again, not that we're always right, but we try to make decision. If we're wrong, we face up to it and say, hey, I was wrong. We'll change it. But some things are so clear to me that I'm opinionated.
So in other words, what I'm hearing you say is a massive part of leadership is being bold.
Yes, you got to cut through the BS sometimes and make a decision.
Mm-hmm.
I started when I was at WyoTech when I was 19. One of my best friends was 20 when he started, and he started 6 months before I did. And I followed him up until he left. But his name is Dave Cermak. He was so wise beyond his years. I have no idea where he got his wisdom. But at 22, 23 years old, this guy was way above it. Again, and when he became vice president and I became training director for diesel, the first couple of weeks I was running across the parking lot to his office. I said, Dave, what would you do in this situation, And he'd tell me. After 2 weeks, he barked at me. He's Mathis. He said, I didn't promote you because you're one of my best friends. He said, I promoted you because you got a good head on your shoulder. He says, make a decision. He said, you don't need to check with me all the time. He says, make a decision. He says, 90% of your decisions will be right. 10% will be wrong. Of the 10% that are wrong, half of them you can correct and make right. The other half you just have to live with. And that was when I was like 22 years old, and I've never forgot that. Make a decision, analyze. And sometimes the decision is to wait, tell the team, hey, we're waiting because we're waiting for more information. But make a decision, inform people what's going on. So, yeah. So about a year into my training director position, and I fired a few a few instructors to change the attitude and everything else. And boy, I started a stir amongst my employees. Everybody's talking behind my back, who's next and what Mathis doing, blah, 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 blah. And boy, it really got to me. So I went over to Dave. I said, Dave, everybody hates me. He said, they're all talking behind my back. And he says, how many are talking behind your back? And I said, well, probably 3 or 4. He said, Jim, he says, in a leadership position, a third of the people will be pro you, a third don't care, and a third will probably complain. He said, if you keep that balance, you're probably doing your job. And I thought, again, from a 22, 23-year-old guy, he's right. If you're moving and shaking with a bunch of people, you're going to upset the apple cart with some things, And again, as a whole, we don't upset that many people. WyoTech is an awesome place to work, and we have longevity, and people love it because they're passionate about us, WyoTech, and how we train students and the success that they have. But as a leader, though, sometimes you've got to ruffle some feathers and make changes and tough decisions. So,
yeah.
Now, there was a point in time from what I recall from originally hearing your story that the parent companies that owned WyoTech had so many problems financially and trying to make it cash flow, trying to make it work, that WyoTech was really at the crossroads of having to close their doors where they hardly had any students.
That's correct.
And then the Wyoming legislature got involved.
Yes.
And so just, if you would, just briefly walk us through a little bit about how that started, what transpired, and how it brought you into where you are today.
Yeah, so in 1993, Phillips colleges went bankrupt. Bankers Trust had loaned them money. So Bankers Trust, out of 93 schools, Bankers Trust took one school back. And I always say God has his hand on WyoTech for whatever reason. But So they took WyoTech back. They bring that new president in that demoted me, so on and so forth. And instead of the company growing to begin with, it was failing. So then they made some changes and put me in charge of being president. So when I took over, we had about 550 students in 1997. We set a goal because we were a beat down company, just absolutely beat down. The way you survive to stab someone else in the back. And we'd bring in attorneys that promoted some of this, that we had to document everything about what employees were doing wrong, and on and on and on. And my philosophy is completely different than that. If you catch an employee doing something wrong, instead of writing it down and waiting for their review, 3 months down the road or whatever, go up, put your arm around them. If they're good employees or got a good attitude, put your arm around them and say, listen, I wish you wouldn't do it that way, do it this way, and encourage them to do right, not blame them for catching people doing wrong. So anyway, we had to change the culture. So we set lofty goals. When I took over, we said we want 2,000 students by the year 2000. We hit that in 1999. We're able to sell WyoTech for Bankers Trust to get out of the bad loan. And we were sold to Allied Capital. Allied Capital allowed me to build more buildings. I grew the campus up to around 2,200 students in Laramie. They sold to Trenton colleges. Their arrogance, just going through due diligence with them, I said their arrogance is going to take them bankrupt. It took longer than I expected, but they went bankrupt in 2015. And that was a public company. They were, at one time, it was a $4 billion market cap company. They had 130 some schools across the country. And so anyway, they went bankrupt. Then a company called Education Credit Management Corporation took 50 schools out of bankruptcy, closed 25 of them down immediately, ran 25 of them. And within less than 3 years, they lost $500 million on running 25 schools. A new CEO comes into that company, says, obviously, we don't know anything about the school business, basically. Let's close all the schools down. So the word went out, we're closing them out. Not try to sell them, not try to find better management, just close them all down. And so out of all these schools, WyoTech, the employees on the Laramie campus fought to keep WyoTech open. And so they worked with the junior college system. They worked with the University of Wyoming. They worked with the governor, the legislators. And a long story short, I was out feeding cows and I get an email from a state representative in February of 2018, after about 3 months of the announcement of they're closing down. I'm out feeding cows and get an email from a state representative, said, Jim, you don't know me, but can you come to Cheyenne and be here in an hour to answer questions to the legislators and governor about WyoTech and their turnaround experiences? Because after I left WyoTech, I took over companies as CEO, Catalyst or whatever, that were going to go bankrupt, and did 3 major turnaround companies. Anyway, and so I went to Cheyenne. By the end of the day, Eli Bebot, who is the president of the Senate, and I'm not politically involved at all, so I didn't know any of these guys, but they said, Jim, we're about ready to give $5 million, and this is public information, you can Google it, but we're about ready to give $5 million to the junior college system to buy WyoTech. And Eli said, and I'm not sure it's a good idea. And I said, Eli, it's not a good idea unless you want to fund it every year. And that just set him back. He said, well, we aren't going to fund this every year. But he said, how do you know that? I said, well, because they put their business plan on their website. And I said, their business plan, in my opinion, is flawed. I said, they don't have any money in there for sales and marketing. So I said, I don't think it's going to work. And he said, well, we aren't going to fund this every year. He says, what happens if I just loan you that money to buy WyoTech? He said, would that help you find the rest of your money? And in the meantime, I'd played with my calculating figures, a $12 million turnaround. We'd need $12 million. And had another family member step in, and we were able to buy WyoTech and literally start over. WyoTech, when I left, it had 2,200 students in Laramie. A couple of years later, it got up to 2,500. That was the peak. And then the wheels fell off of that parent company and WyoTech. And so when we bought WyoTech 6 years ago, we started with 12 students and 12 employees. So when I left, again, we had 2,200. We had almost 450 employees. And so when I came back, it was like a BB in a battleship. I mean, you couldn't find students, you couldn't find employees. But currently we'll have 1,150 students here in a week, less than a week's time. So, yeah.
Wow. Congratulations. That's an awesome story. That's great. So
Yeah.
what is your hopes now for the future? It seems like you've got the trajectory going the right way. You just stated a couple of philosophies about not giving away your profits and making good business decisions. So what are your hopes at this point for where you're going?
Well, when we bought WyoTech, we had a vision of having 10,000 students by the year 2030. And from a sale, and I love business and I love growing businesses and setting the stage and everything else. And from a sales and marketing standpoint, that'd be no problem. Literally no problem. We could do it. The challenge is we're in Laramie, Wyoming. And again, I don't like to use that as an excuse, but as a whole, there's no affordable housing for employees. Most of our instructors come from out of state. We have to hire technicians and teach them to be teachers. And so most of, there's not enough mechanics or technicians in Laramie or even Wyoming to support our need for teachers. So we are literally on a national search. We spend, I don't know, 20, 30,000 a month on advertising for teachers every month for several years, trying to find leads, trying to find someone that can afford to buy housing or find housing in Laramie and come teach for us. And again, we pay a competitive salary and everything else, but that's our challenge. So now we're looking, I didn't want to go outside of Laramie, but now we're actually kicking the tires on several opportunities outside of Laramie because, again, I like to grow businesses and want to continue to grow and provide. The need for tradespeople is stronger and there's more need now than ever in the history because 20, 30 years ago, we swung the pendulum way too far in our high schools to eliminate funding for a lot of the trades programs and send everybody to universities or junior colleges, which is nothing wrong. I'm a trustee at University of Wyoming. So we need both, but we truly need both. And the pendulum swung way too far to only college or junior colleges. And now it's starting to swing back. And therefore, all the trades out there, the plumbers, the electricians, the building contractors, everybody, the diesel, automotive, welders, there are more opportunities and high-paying jobs than we can provide. Anybody can provide. So we want to take advantage of that and try to help change America for the better by producing more tradespeople. And so that's a big goal and a big vision of ours. So
that's awesome.
So how do we as a society do a better job at engaging our youth to help them understand and to become more enthusiastic about the trades?
Yeah, I think it's exposing, kids at a very young age to agriculture, and have them enjoy it. So many times kids don't want to work and they don't see the enjoyment of work. But there's, and my plea, I guess, to people is enjoy your work, enjoy what you're doing. And the trades are fun when you achieve something. Loading hay last night, as an old man, I'm 67 years old, and, I sweat. It's a pain. But at the end, you think, boy, I feel good. I feel great. I see what I stacked. That's a pretty stack on that semi-trailer, And so find enjoyment and joy in what you do. You aren't going to do it every hour or every day, but find that joy and expose people to the trades. This 16-year-old girl that's been staying with us, our great niece, I taught her to drive skid steer. I was hauling round bales, which are a pain in the butt on as you know, Ron. And so we had a bunch left over that needed to go back in the haystack. And so I had a tractor that could pick up 2 bales, and I had my skid steer there. And today has never driven a skid steer. She's 16 years old. She's from inner city, Oklahoma City. I said, today I want you to come help. And the first 2 or 3 weeks, she stayed at the ranch with us. Like I said, she's been there 6 weeks total. She stayed in the basement in her bedroom. And we'd almost have to force her to come out and get off her iPhone and tablet and so on and so forth. I got her in that skid steer. She says, one of the best days I've ever had. I gave her very little instruction. Gene Smith gave me very little instruction. He trusted me that you know how to go forward, you know how to stop, you know how to back up. If you get in a bind, stop. So I gave her very little instruction. Next thing you know, she was spearing those round bales and taking them into stack yards just like a pro. 2 hours later, we had the job all done, and she was smiling from ear to ear. But it's exposing young people. Trust them. a little, get them in a position where you can trust them. They aren't going to hurt anything. They aren't going to hurt themselves, and don't over give them too many instructions because that makes them fearful. Let them make a few mistakes and then coach them a little bit. So, but yeah, so exposing young people to the enjoyment of the trades and getting their hands dirty and accomplishing something. And again, it could be, they might want to be accountants or attorneys. Get them exposed to some of this stuff. Instead of just sitting in your room or whatever, looking at Facebook or, well, TikTok anymore for the young people. It's enjoyable because the technology, as Ron, you know better than I, but farming and agriculture is all technology. All these diesel engines, that's all technology. So now if you get their hand dirt a little bit, they can also bring what they learned or know to the table with all the technology because they are very sharp on technology. So now combine the both of them, and you've got a heck of a employee and future person that can add to the economy and stuff because they know the technology, they grew up with it, and now get their hands dirty once in a while, and away they go. So
awesome. That's awesome. What a great experience for your niece.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's huge. We have a lot of tour groups that visit the farm, and the tour group that I had last week, those folks were from California, and they had never seen a large tractor. She said, I can sit in the tire. Yeah. I go, yeah, you can sit in the tire. And for them to be able to just, like you said, be exposed to something different is so huge to many people. And those of us who are in the trades or we're in agriculture, we kind of just take that for granted because, in fact, one of my employees last week told me, he said that he's dating a new gal, and he said that she's completely blown away about all the different things that he can do. We just don't think of that because we have to do that on a daily basis. You have to know how to bale hay. You have to know how to cut it. You have to know how to fix the machines. You have to know how to run the water. Yeah. You have to know how to sell it. You have to know how to stack it. You have to know how to ship it. You have to do all of those things.
Yes.
Those are just things that we do naturally in agriculture.
Yes.
And I think that instead of us taking that for granted, and I'm not saying that in a negative sense, that I think we just don't understand that we know and can do so much. And I find that when, just like this tour group that was here last week, when they can surround themselves with that and they can just get a little bit of bits and pieces of it, it drives them to want to learn more and to want to get involved more.
Absolutely.
And so when I look at your life and your story, and I just really appreciate you sharing that story with us and with our audience, because I think it's very impactful. Because I find that one of the major things in your story is this drive that you have to never give up, to never quit. And so what do you think has contributed to that drive that you have to never quit, to continue to be persistent, to continue to work? And how can people, when they're at the cusp of wanting to give up, or when they're frustrated, or when they're disappointed, or when things don't work out the way that they want to go, what kind of advice would you have based on your own experience about, sometimes you just need to go one more day. Sometimes you just need to go one more hour. Sometimes you just need to put you've got to eat a little bit of crow, and you've got to say, well, okay, I'm going to do this, but I'm not going to give up. What's contributed that to you in your own life, and how would you encourage others to develop that same mindset?
Yeah. My mind's going several different directions, but one of the things I came up with, when you see bad leadership and you work for bad leaders, you understand the importance of good leadership and good organizations. And it's been 10 years ago probably, but I came across a Bible verse in Proverbs 29:18. And it says, where there is no vision, people perish, but he that keepeth the law, happy is he. And boy, did that stick with me because I've been in churches with poor leadership. I've been in families, and I haven't always been the best leader, haven't been the best dad and leader as my family. But boy, did that hit a nerve with me. Where there's no leadership, people perish, but he that keepeth the law. So stay within the lines, stay legal, just don't cheat. But, and so leadership, and we're all leaders. I don't care if I talked to a high school class last week, 3 different classes in Wheatland. And I said, we're all leaders. Anybody can sit around, complain about the teacher or complain about this friend over here. Anybody can do that. That's easy. It doesn't take any skill to complain. What takes some skill and confidence and boldness is being different and saying, I'm not going to be part of that group just mulling around and being pissy and complain about my teacher or complain about this person or complain about my parents. Anybody can do that, anybody. So a leader needs to say, I want to be different. I want to say, I understand we have issues. Let's do something about it. And on our home place, our ranch, we have what we call Squaw Peak. And it's a thumb of rock. It's about 2 miles away from our picture window in our house. And so we have a lot of people come from all over the country, mostly flatlanders. And they'll see that Squaw Peak. And it looks like, it's a good hike and you can drive part of the way up there, the trail road. And they says, and families and friends will come out there and they say, can we climb the Squaw Peak? Absolutely right. And so I've gone with them several times and heard stories. And so like any mountain, and again, ours, I call them more hills, but they're mountains to flatliners. And it's probably 1,500 feet elevation rise. I'm guessing that. And so you start walking up the ridge to go to Squaw Peak. And all of a sudden you realize it's a ridge. It's not the face of the mountain. You've got to go down to go back up. And when you go down, you get into down timber, rattlesnakes, sagebrush, and the family that was all gung-ho 10 minutes earlier are down in this thing, flat, worried about snakes, worried about getting through the down timber, and they turn on the leader. They'll always turn on the leader. Say, why did you bring us this way? Well, the leader didn't know. As leaders, we don't know exactly what's going to happen tomorrow, but it shouldn't stop us. So as a leader, we can mill around in the sagebrush and the down timber and chasing rattlesnakes or kicking rattlesnakes off our feet. Or we can say, you know what? I wasn't aware of this either. Sorry, folks, but we got to keep going. And let's try going up sideways of the ridge, this next ridge, and see how that goes. Or let's go this way. But as a leader, we can sit there and mull around and nobody accomplishes anything. So as a leader, from a family, from our churches, whatever organization we're involved with, take a step forward and say, you know what? And even if you aren't a leader, take a leadership position. That's where I shone, and I always got in trouble. But when I saw lack of leadership and I saw something better, instead of complaining about it, and don't misunderstand me, I'm not perfect. I complain too. But then I woke up and said, that's an opportunity. If I lead us out of this, I might make a name for myself. And so that's how I got accomplished a lot of things in businesses. Instead of just complaining about the bosses and no money to work, blah, 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 I went out and made a difference. But anyway, leaders have an opportunity. And with this mountain story, so then you go up the next face and you realize it's just another ridge. There's another huge, bigger valley with more down timber, more huge boulders to get through and everything else. But as the leader, you just have to face it because, again, life is a journey. It's, and just because you're on top, yes, it's a great experience. And I've been on top, but trust me, I've been in valleys more of my life than I ever have been on the top, and as leaders, and as you learn to navigate your problems and your valleys of life, I call them valleys of life, it's enjoyable. I don't want everything I don't want to sit at a friend of mine. He was the most decorated pilot in history, Manfred Reach. And he made millions in a business venture after he retired from the military, so on and so forth. He was drinking $200 bottle of wine, sitting out in over the ocean, looking out in his huge mansion out in California. And after 6 months, he said, I was bored out of my trees. Again, that's a pinnacle. People think, oh, I can't wait to have a mansion, or I can't wait to drink $200 wine, every day. and look out over the ocean. Well, you can only do that so long. If you have anything going for you, I don't care how old you are, you can only do that for so long. And he found out, he says this was no fun at all. So long story short, he always wanted to be a rancher, bought a ranch that bordered us, and we became very good friends. But I'll never forget that story. But life is not just about the peaks; it's about the journey. And one of the things that I'll share too. Had a speaker at a bank meeting here 2 weeks ago, and he said, and it's so true. He said, I wrote it down. Be comfortable with being uncomfortable. Because once you get into high school and start making decisions about college and careers, and life is about being uncomfortable. And the more comfortable you can be about being uncomfortable, the better off you're going to be. And everybody's uncomfortable. And some people can live with it with grace and no problem. I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, but we're going to keep going one way or the other. And other people worry to death because they're so uncomfortable. And so the more you can be comfortable with being uncomfortable, trust me, that is life. I don't care what position you're in, being comfortable with being uncomfortable, because if you aren't comfortable with being uncomfortable, you got problems and life is going to be miserable. And I always refuse to be miserable with life. So.
Oh, well,
Excellent. Awesome.
that is such a great way to sort of leave our guest today, I think, with, just that thought that, if people really are introspective about the journey that you've had and the lessons that you've learned along the way, I think there's just a lot of applicability in terms of people just really analyzing how are we navigating this, the life that we're given right now, in terms of just, there's a lot of chaos, there's a lot of valleys, there's a lot of boulders, there's a lot of snakes, there's a lot of down timber. And if we always choose the path that is the easiest, or we never proceed forward because we don't want it to be hard or difficult, then we don't get that opportunity to really grow and expand and really reach full potential, which I know we have a lot of incredibly accomplished people that are in agriculture. And yet sometimes I really feel like the times that we're in right now are kind of beating people down and making people feel like they need to question their path.
Yeah.
And so I think that just the introspection that you can say over a career that has spanned, a few years is great in terms of really encouraging people to, lift your eyes up, move forward. It's just a snake on your boot. Kick it off and keep going, right? It's fine.
Yeah. They didn't bite you, so keep going. Yeah. Yep.
Oh my goodness. Well, this has been amazing.
Absolutely.
So Jim, we sort of alluded to that we were going to play a little trivia to wrap up our day. Are you game for a little trivia?
You bet.
All right. Well, I got to get my glasses on so I can read my questions appropriately, so that when Ron gets these wrong, he doesn't blame me that I have read that question incorrectly. Okay.
See, I told you, Jim.
Yeah.
All right. So I went out, and so these are all Google. So this is not very deep research, right? So, we may have some inaccuracy in the answer, but we're going by what Google says. All right. So the first question that we've got, and we've got two of them, but what is the highest demand trade program in trade schools for 2024?
And you want a trade like plumbing or electrical or whatever.
Yep. What is the highest demand?
I would say plumbing.
Okay.
I would say electricians.
It is electricians.
Good.
Ooh.
Electrical workers. Although I will say, because I don't like it when Ron wins, I will say one list said elevator installers, another list said electrical workers.
Wow.
Well, I can tell you this. I mean, the reason that I came up with electricians is because our guy that traditionally comes out and works on our equipment, on our tractors of the farm, he said that when I was talking with him about our middle son wanting to pursue the trades and what direction he should go, he said, I can really teach him what he needs to know mechanically, but what he needs to know and have a real true understanding of is electric and hydraulics.
Yep.
And he said those are just massively important. So I think when we think of electricians, we think of traditional electricians in our house or in a building or something like that. But it's a huge field that goes all the way down to those of us who are farming, so that we can keep our tractors working, so we can do the job that we need to do.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, this isn't one of my trivia questions, but one of the things that I saw, Jim, in a video that I watched about you was a story about a kind of a second career person who came back to school for a second career. How many students do you have that are coming back to school to relearn or to learn something new and to enter maybe a second career at some point in their life?
Yeah, we have a few, but not many. And it's because of our model. Unless they can afford us, it's tough. So we do get some military VA that students use VA benefits and stuff. So we'll have probably 5% of our population will be VA students, and they're learning normally a new career. And then we have a few older people who come in and say, I always wanted to do custom paint or, street rod building or whatever. And so we'll have a few of them, but as a whole, our market is high school driven students, first career. So, yep.
Okay. All right. Well, all right. One more trivia question. So this is also about trades, but what is currently the highest paying trade? And again, this is Google. So, so coming out of a trade school, what is the highest paying trade someone can learn coming right out of trade school?
Boy, we hear all kinds of things, so I haven't Googled it, but diesel is our highest, and welding, I hear some crazy pipe welders make some amazing money, but I'm sure avionics, so I don't know, to be honest with you, what Google would say.
Well, my guess actually would be plumbers.
Okay. Well, Google, again, it's Google, says construction managers, followed shortly by elevator technicians.
Yeah. Wow.
Elevator technicians. Wow.
We don't have too many of those in Wyoming. So.
Jim, I'm not so sure we have a building that's over 7 or 8 stories high in the entire state of Wyoming, do we?
Exactly
what's
right.
The tallest building? You remember?
I think you'd go broke as an elevator technician in Wyoming. So,
do you remember what the tallest building is in Wyoming?
Isn't it in Casper?
I want to say it actually is, but I want to say it is either like 7 or 8 stories.
Yeah, it's not very tall. Yeah.
Yeah. And that would be by far the tallest building in the state.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, regardless, the lists and the starting average salaries for like the top 10 trades, which of the plumbers were there, the electricians were there, the welders, the fabricators, those are some very, very impressive starting wages, I have to say.
We have a career fair every quarter. We start school every quarter and graduate every quarter, but they have to go minimum of 9 months. And again, employers come out every quarter to recruit our students. But some of the job offers are incredible. Several companies will fly their private jets out, and if they find 2 or 3 hot students that they want to impress, they'll take off that afternoon, fly back to corporate or their headquarters or whatever, show them the operation, and fly them back so they don't miss any time, so they still have perfect attendance the next day. But they'll reimburse their tuition, they'll sign on bonuses, tool allotment, you name it, and all the overtime you want. Had a student talk to me the other day. He made $100,000 first year out after 9 months of training. So
that's amazing.
It's a big deal.
That's amazing. Yeah. It's amazing. Well, Jim, we sure appreciate your time. This has been so great. If you saw me kind of like looking down, it's because I was jotting down all of your amazing little nuggets, because I'm like, well, I got to capture the nuggets.
Okay.
He's got a lot of them. And Jim, just thank you for being an inspiration and for continuing to lead. I love what you said about the fact that I think so many of us are work toward a pinnacle, but we don't understand that the pinnacle is not it's not what we think it is.
Right.
That the journey is really what it's more all about, and there will be several pinnacles that we'll reach along that way. But we build character by, when we see a path that looks hard, by not quitting. And by continuing to forge forward. And that's how we make a difference in the lives of others. I think that's certainly how we make a difference in our own lives and the people that we directly influence. So thank you for being that example. And thanks for joining us today. We loved it.
You're welcome. Yeah, enjoy the journey, because just sitting watching Fox News is not the pinnacle of life. So, yeah.
Amen to that.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, take care there in Laramie, and we will do lunch soon.
Oh, love that. Thank you, Ron.
You bet.
Thanks again, Jim.
You bet.
You've been listening to the Ag Inspo podcast with Ron Rabo and Rena Striegel. Find Ag Inspo on Farm Journal's YouTube channel and anywhere you find your favorite podcasts. For more information about today's guest or the resources referenced today, please see the show notes listed below. Join us next time when we will meet another inspirational leader who has taken those small steps to bring about really big change.